Messy days the last few days, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I think I'm just completely sleep deprived. So you'll have to give me a kick if I fall asleep or something.
okay, okay.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. And unlike you guys, I'm just like not a night person. I'm not, yeah, I don't stay awake too late except when I get sucked into Twitter, which then, I, are we live yet or?
I'm pushing it live now here. Nice, okay, you do the
Cool.
same? Okay, we are live. So we're also streaming to a channel called Revolution in the Streets, which is a
Mhm,
fast-growing YouTube channel.
mhm.
So we have the name set to Julian Assange Extradition case updates with Dr. Deepa Driver.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. Um, so you've been there like on the ground at the courthouse, in the courthouse, like during the entire process, right?
Yeah, I've been the legal observer for uh, a society here in the UK known as the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself, but I'm attending the Assange hearings and also the hearings of, um, more recently, the hearings of Stephen Donziger and also Craig Murray on behalf of the society. Anything I say today, of course, is my personal position rather than a position of the society. But yeah, I've for the Assange hearings, I've been there. I think right from the start, from the first day of the administrative hearings in court. I've always tried to make sure that whether in the public gallery or in the well of the court, I have a place. So yeah, and thanks to a lot of grassroots supporters last time around, I got a place. This time I actually got um, my formal legal observer place, which was a real battle to get last time around. So yeah, I have been there. Long answer to a very short question.
Yeah. So just real quick, what is like your first impression about the whole thing? Like what? Just in short, like everything that happened, right? What is your impression about that?
Um, it's a stitch up, and it's very hard to see it as anything else at a personal level because this is the most important political prisoner in the world. This is the most important case in terms of press freedom in the world at the moment, of course. Um, and yet, the debate in the courtroom often has little to do with what's really important. It's about technical points of law, most of which have little to do with justice. So, short answer, that's that.
Yeah. So when you say that, like, do you feel that the actual judge is going to treat this as like like any other case? Like, is he going to rule like in an objective way, or is it already far too late to even think about that? Just your personal opinion.
You know, I have been thinking about it for a long time. I went into the court and actually, in the first day, I was the way that the last 2 days of the appeal hearings um, were put together. Just for anybody who hasn't been following the case too closely, um, Assange won his case in January in the sense that extradition was barred, and you would expect that at that point he would be released. But what happened was that he was, they continued to keep him in Belmarsh, which is a maximum security prison, and quite a hard prison, on the grounds that it was unfair to the US, who wanted to appeal the magistrate's decision. The magistrate's court is the lowest court, but it's also the main extradition court in the UK. And once that decision was taken, the idea was, um, because Assange had sought asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy before, he is termed a flight risk, which means that anytime um, he seeks bail, bail is denied. So situation now is that at the appeal hearing, the US was putting the case that, and the way the appeal hearing works in the UK is that at the appeal stage, you cannot introduce new points of law, so to speak, not new points of law, new ways of tackling the same evidence. What you can introduce is points based on points of law, which are saying, okay, the judge made a mistake in interpreting the law in X way or Y way, and that's what was discussed. Before this appeal hearing, there was something called the grounds hearing, where what are the areas which can be challenged were agreed. And at that stage, both the prosecution, that is the US represented by the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK, and Assange's team suggested they needed 4 days to put their case forward. And the judge at that stage, Judge Holroyd, said, no, I only give you 2 days. Now, when we came to this appeal, it was going to be Judge Holroyd and this other female judge who presided over it. But instead of the female judge, we had Lord Chief Justice of the UK, Lord Burnett, who joined the team. So we had Judge Holroyd, who had ruled not against Assange, but ruled in various things which the prosecution wanted to include, and Lord Burnett. Lord Burnett's quite an interesting guy because he, for those of you who are anonymous, you'll of course know the story of Lowry Dove. And Lord Burnett was the judge in that case, in Lowry's case. What he did say at the time when he ruled in favour of Lowry and against extraditing Lowry was that the points made in Lowry's case are very unlikely to be applicable to any other cases. But when you, so we had these 2 days of hearings. On day one, so they're about 9 hours, starts at about 10 in the morning and well, not 9 hours, sorry, 6 hours, goes on till about 4:30 in the evening. So the first 6 hours are used by one side. The first day was the US side, and then half an hour for Julian's side. And then on second day, Julian's people got 6 hours and half an hour for the US side. So that's how the 2 days were structured. The court, which many of you may not have seen, I don't know, Mark, if you can bring up a picture of it. It's a very old building. It's a very beautiful building. It's very impressive when you both go outside and also when you go inside the building. So it just gives this sense of, oh, this is an old and trusted process. But actually, I went into the court quite untrusting in some ways, not expecting anything fair to happen. And in the first day when the US were talking about their case, the questions that the judges asked made me think, oh, well, they've already made up their mind. But then on day 2, and also on the end of day 1, when Assange's team came back, it was just one punch after another. It was just amazing. Watch them. Now, James Lewis, who is the guy on the US side, James Lewis QC, he's a very, very experienced judge. And if I'm not mistaken, he's the premier, not a lawyer, but a judge on the Falkland, in relation to the Falkland Islands. And, or something, one of the, not Falkland Islands, sorry, one of the, what is it? Mark, do you know the name? The one which is used for tax havens. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Anyway, if you Google Mark Lord James Lewis, then it'll tell you what he does as a judge. But in this case, of course, in the UK, he's a very senior lawyer, and he's a very crafty, foxy kind of guy. So he's got this very showman-like style. He goes into the court and he kind of talks for ages about things that you think are completely unimportant. And then just when you start to tune out, he says something really hard and you think, oh my God, he must be right. But then on the other hand, when you hear Assange's lawyers, it's like one punch after the other. Every single point was superb.
Okay, so real quick, Deepa. Like, okay, so I put the picture of the courthouse on the background so people can see what it looks like. And about that tax haven, maybe you mean you have the Cayman Islands, you have the Virgin Islands, you have the Isle of Man. I'm not sure what you which one you meant, but. Did you hear me okay, or I can't hear you anymore now?
You muted yourself, Deepa. You have to unmute.
There's a little mute button on the left side. Okay, well, in the meantime, for listeners, you can see, well, at least on the YouTube stream, you can see the courthouse. It's like a super old building. Like,
sorry, it cut me out of the call, so I think I'm back now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So which island did you mean? Like the Isle of Man or Jersey?
She seems to have a bad connection.
Okay, let's see if we can.
Or something.
Like I think you're an admin in this server. You can actually set the location. Maybe it's set to like USA instead of Europe or something. If you click on a little like the little wheel next to live show, you can actually change the location. I think maybe that helps.
Can you hear me, guys?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Every time I move to a different window to look for the the little tax haven that Lewis is a judge in, I keep getting disconnected. So I won't do that. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. So and presumably you can still see me as well, or not? Oh, now maybe.
Yes, we can see you.
All fine.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I was just trying to say I don't know which I can't remember the tax haven's name, but if I go to the other window to look for it, it cuts me off Discord.
We'll just say it afterwards. Then we'll check it out. But okay, so but what you mentioned was, and I think this is very important, right? This is that technically in UK law, when someone appeals, they're not allowed to go into like create like new stories and go into like new details. It's all about the process, and if the judge made mistakes on that, like the whole legal process, like.
Well, they're not allowed to relitigate the old case, so they can't present the same case in a different way. But suppose since the day of the decision, more information has come to light, then of course they can present new information. But what the idea is that what is already given is set in the way it's given, and then if the judge made mistakes in the points of law, that's again discussed. At least that's how I understand it. But I'm not a lawyer. This is the way it's been explained to me, so treat it with a pinch of salt, so to speak.
Yeah, so I was asking it because that so a few things did come to light. From the defense side, we had that whole story that the CIA actually tried to kidnap or assassinate Assange. I mean, that whole thing leaked in the media. And on the prosecution...
Can I just say that the CIA didn't try to kidnap or assassinate him. They planned to kidnap or assassinate him. It is possible they tried to kidnap him because there is some information available about a door being left open in order to be able to take him out of the embassy. But in relation to the murder plans, they were still plans because although they received a plan of the embassy in terms of what room he was in, etc., they had an internal argument with the people at the DOJ, etc., about the legalities of being able to kill him. So the CIA would have done it in a heartbeat, but I think they were stopped from doing it because of various other considerations. So, I mean, the reason I make that point, Mark, is because if the CIA wants to kill him, they will. Right? To my mind, the only reason he's safe, that's a speculation actually. So maybe I should stop there. But go on. That was the only correction I wanted to make. That they didn't actually try to kill him and fail. They just planned to kill him, but didn't execute their plan.
No, you're right, and that's a very good distinction to make. I did see pictures showing up in the media. They actually saw guys sitting in a car waiting in the streets and stuff, and I saw all of that too, and that's why I was wondering about it. But that's okay. So that's a new thing that came to light. But then the Americans they stated a whole thing about him not being safe in the United States. They argued that perhaps he was not suicidal, and that they attacked the psychologist that was like involved with him and judging that whole process. And then they said like, we give certain guarantees, or we will consider giving certain guarantees, like have him do a part of his sentence in Australia, or not put him under SAMS. The special administrative measures where he's like isolated, that they would put him in a situation where he would be able to have contact with his lawyers. That's kind of the story they were presenting, right, in court, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I mean, so let's talk about the different things in terms of new information that has been available since January. Firstly, we have information which is now in the public domain, an article based on about 9 hours of interviewing by an Icelandic journalist called Bjartmar Alexandersson. And Bjartmar showed that the key FBI witness in the case, Sigurður Ingi Thordarson, lied about Julian hacking into secure systems, and this computer intrusion charge that is there, out of the various counts that were made in the grand jury's indictment, is potentially untrue, not potentially, definitely untrue. The other bit of evidence, as you rightly pointed out, is this idea of how can you send somebody to a country where the main agency, the CIA, plotted to kill him, but also where the main agency, the CIA, is the one which decides which is one of the people that the DOJ will consult, or the agency is one that can say that he can be put under SAMS. Now, SAMS are not the only, and SAMS, as Mark, you rightly pointed out, is special administrative measures, and it sounds so administrative, just boring stuff, bureaucratic shit. But actually it's not. It's measures which mean that Julian will only get one phone call a month of 15 minutes, and communications with his lawyers will be extremely restricted. All his communications will be monitored. They are not the only isolatory measures. So even if he were not under SAMS, he could be put under something called administrative segregation, which segregates him from the general population in the prison, and again restricts his communication. There are also other forms of isolation called communication management units. And for those of you who've been following the case of Daniel Hale, Daniel is in a communication management unit, which means that his access to various forms of communication is highly monitored. So
just real quick, Daniel Hale is a whistleblower who exposed the whole story about the drone strikes, and one important thing he mentioned is that they were hitting civilians, innocent people, and they only checked afterwards if they were a threat or not, and it caused a lot of innocent deaths, and he exposed the whole thing, and then he was locked away.
Yeah, and Daniel Hale's case is very interesting because they kept quiet for a number of years, and then went after him more recently. He's got a 47 or 48-month prison sentence with Julian. So coming back to Julian, so there's this new evidence that has come out about these two things, but there's also the US's idea. The main point they made was, in terms of the judge's decision, she was wrong not to give her draft judgment to the United States, saying, I'm going to rule against extradition, and say to them, are there any assurances that you can give me in relation to either Julian's mental health or in relation to the conditions of detention in the US that will allow me to extradite him? So the bias in the UK, of course, because of the treaty, is in favor of extradition to the US. So extradition it's not a balance of probability thing, or even innocent until proven guilty. As long as the US can present what they call a prima facie case, saying that there are equivalent crimes in the UK, there is a presumption that Julian will be extradited. And there are some grounds which the judge can use to deny extradition. And Julian's mental health and the US prison conditions were two of those grounds, which is why the US were very keen to destroy the evidence of the main psychiatrist, the most experienced psychiatrist of the four psychiatrists who testified. Two or more testified for the defense, and about two and a half, I would say, because one of them is that comes in a different format, testified for the prosecution. The main psychiatrist who testified for Julian's side, amongst the others, was a guy called Professor Kopelman. Now, Kopelman is known as the father of neuropsychiatry in the UK. He's very well regarded. He's hugely respected, very, very decent man, has been involved in a number of important death penalty cases, where people are going to the US for extradition, or, he's used all over the world, his advice is taken. And they were trying to say that Kopelman was biased, and his assessment was wrong. So they wanted to destroy the fact that Julian might be suffering the long-term effects of torture, and that he had this depressive condition. And the second thing they wanted to do, besides destroying Kopelman, in my opinion, is also they wanted to give these assurances which say that Julian will not be put under SAMS, they've said that, and that he will be allowed to serve his sentence in Australia. And so they're making all these assurances, right? But if you look and read those assurances, what's really interesting is all those assurances, what they say is, as of February of this year, if Julian has said or done anything that might that they might deem to be a threat to national security, then they can go back on those assurances. So those assurances are not written on the paper, worth the paper they're written on, because, as Julian's lawyer very rightly pointed out, for example, saying that the lawyer, saying in court that, could somebody publish the unredacted Vault 7 cables, that itself, not just a word that Julian said, but words that he has not said and actions that he has not done, could also be taken and construed potentially US. And once they get him into US custody, they could just say, no, sorry, you're under SAMS anyway. And that's what they did to other people. So a lot of the evidence that came out on the second day showed that the US had given assurances, for example, in the case of a Spanish mafia guy, drugs guy. And they had said they wouldn't put the guy under SAMS, but they actually did. And they went back on their assurances without a heartbeat, because they said that they said that the Spanish court had misunderstood what they had said, and the assurance had been given by the prosecutor, but the prosecutor, so the way it's phrased is that the prosecutor will not deny returning this man to Spain to serve his sentence. And they actually said, well, the prosecutor was never asked. So he definitely did not deny, but somebody else took the decision that this guy would not be returned. So these kinds of things are pretty serious. You know, when you give an assurance to the court, you expect that assurance to be upheld. And certainly the judges seem to think these assurances would be upheld. But then, as the defense demonstrated the next day, there have been many instances where the United States makes assurances, gives commitments, and then does something else. For example, in the case of Sami Al-Arian, many of you may not have heard about his case. This is a case of a professor based in the University of South Florida who was involved in one of the largest Palestinian charities in the US. And in the aftermath of the war on terror, he was arrested and then detained in isolation for, even in periods of solitary confinement. And over a period of 6 years was really put through the ringer by the US for, trying to get him to testify on other people, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, he came to a plea bargain with them and then decided, and it was agreed that he would agree to one count and then he would be deported. But then when that plea bargain process got over, Gordon Cromberg, who's also the attorney who's dealing with Julian's case, he's a US deputy district attorney, I think is the terminology. He actually managed to get another grand jury indictment and then got Al-Arian called before that grand jury, just like they did with Chelsea Manning, with the threat of contempt if you do not testify. So these kinds of things are things that the US does, where they give assurances, they make commitments, or at least this is what I understand of what was said at the hearing. So, I mean, it's quite a lot of this, which is said at the hearings. You're hearing for the first time and you think, gosh, what's going on? But they were talking about cases like Abu Hamza, where assurances were given and those assurances were not honored. And on the other hand, the US spent a lot of time arguing that, no, there was never any way the US engaged in such behavior. They always upheld their commitments and the assurance should be taken at face value. And Julian, one of the things, the prosecutor said some weird things like talking about one of the expert witnesses and saying, oh, she's just a GP. And then about Sondra Crosby, who's one of the, who goes with Physicians for Human Rights to examine prisoners in Guantanamo, a very experienced doctor, and saying, oh, she's just a GP, so her opinion doesn't count. Or saying things like, oh, well, Mr. Assange, now that he knows that he will not be put under SAMS, may actually be looking forward to finishing off his prison sentence in the US and then going back to Australia because he will be sent to serve a sentence in Australia, etc. Et so the way they were talking about it was, oh, it was no big deal just going to the US and then they'll send him back to Australia to serve his sentence, without dealing with the fundamental point that why should a journalist with a 100% record of accuracy be sent to prison at all, especially after he's had 11 years of arbitrary detention? So I'll stop there. Sorry, Mark, I went on for a bit.
No, what surprised me is that I had a feeling that they weren't so convinced about their whole story either. Because what you're saying, they were like being demeaning towards GPs, for example. But they also said, like, well, if Assange was autistic, he wouldn't have custody over his kids, for example.
Yeah, in his 20s, he had custody over his child. So they're saying, oh, he wouldn't be able to do that, and he wouldn't be able to sustain a relationship with Stella. And then Mark Summers, Julian's QC, said, well, Laurie Love, who is known to be autistic and has a clear diagnosis, had a girlfriend at the time when he was supposed to be extradited. So there's lots of autistic people who are high-functioning autistic people so the importance of the autism thing, just in case anybody didn't know, is that there's a very bad way of thinking about mental health within the UK extradition treaty, which is that they don't care if somebody who is of normal mental health were to go to the US, get depressed and commit suicide, essentially. and I'm sorry to trigger anybody who's who might be upset by that. What they do care about is if you are rational and you have the capacity to commit suicide, and you have the intellect to be able to commit suicide in situations like the US, where suicide prevention, they say, is very well monitored, then that's fine. Whereas if you are somebody like Julian, the idea is that the depressive condition, this severe to moderate depression condition, plus his autism spectrum disorder, combine to create a situation where he's unable to resist the impulse to commit suicide as a result of his mental health condition. Now, it's a very weird way of talking about it, and the experts themselves said this is not the way psychiatrists talk about it at all. It's not like you... It just doesn't make sense, but that's how it's treated in the Extradition Act. So what they have to prove is that by way of mental disorder, Julian cannot resist the urge to commit suicide, and therefore that's why he should not be extradited. So the mental health diagnosis is very important, as well as the previous history of depression, and this idea that even if he's a high-functioning autistic person, he is not able to resist the impulse to commit suicide when he knows the situation is so bad. But, you know, to be stuck, one of the things they explained about SAMS is he will be in a concrete box, 10 by 8, I believe, or thereabouts. His food will be provided through a hatch every day. He will not be allowed to talk to anyone. The prosecution suggested he might still be able to talk to people. And guess what? He'll be able to do that through the drainage between the cells or through a closed door. That's what they mean when they say he might be able to talk to people. I mean, the cynicism of things is the best phrase I heard, best, worst, is he will be allowed individual recreation. What does that mean? He will be allowed to go into the next adjacent cell, which is likely to be empty, and walk around a little bit and do some exercise, and then go back to his cell. And that's his individual recreation. So it's just horrendous conditions that he will encounter. And by way of mental disorder, were he not be able to resist the urge to commit suicide as a result of being in those conditions, then we should prevent extradition. So anybody who listens to this, you know, any normal person who listens to this, and I hope everybody here, well, we're all not normal, I guess all of us are strange in some way, but what I mean is most ordinary people will look at this and say, this is a completely batty way to talk about anything, especially with regard to mental health. And there shouldn't be a presumption in favor of extradition for a journalist who has done nothing wrong. But none of that really is discussed in any depth.
No, to me personally, it shows an obsessive and close to like sadistic approach to this whole thing. Just saying that they know by themselves that this is not normal. You can say like, yeah, he is able to recreate himself in a cell next to his own, like on his own, and that this is sufficient. You can't. Like, you know, this is not a healthy situation for anyone. And they know he is a journalist who practically did nothing wrong. He just published materials that should have been published by any other journalist, but they just didn't do their job, I guess. So, yeah, that is horrible. And even that in that, I also found that weird. Just real quick about the Lorry thing. That yeah, when the defense of Assange compared it to the Lorry case, right? That they said like, yeah, in the case of Lorry, it wasn't just autism, it also had to do with his skin condition and whatever. And they tried to like say like, it's not autism alone wasn't enough. It had also to do with that. Like there were other things at play. And then about the resisting suicide. I'm not sure if this was mentioned at all, but we know that early on, this must be like last year, that there were stories about them finding a razor blade with Julian. There were him asking for what is it? How is it called? Confessions with a Catholic priest, I think. If I'm correct.
That's right, and also, you know, calling the Samaritans hundreds of times a day. One of the things last time that for those of you who have been following this, when the razor blade incident was discussed in court, James Lewis tried to pretend as though that never happened. He tried to say to Kopelman, well, these are self-disclosed things, just like hallucinations that Julian was hearing, voices that he was hearing were self-disclosed. Now, anybody who's had a hallucination or anything close to that knows that these always have to be self-disclosed because, of course, they're in your head. Nobody else can disclose them. But more importantly, coming back to the way they talk about all of this, the razor blade incident is one, but there's also the reason he was moved into healthcare, supposedly. I mean, although he found that the isolation of healthcare particularly bad, is that he had been punching the walls and I believe punching himself, and that's why he had to be moved. And you can imagine, how much trauma he must be feeling. He's never been a free man to see his children, never been able to give them a proper hug and spend time with them. And it's a very depressing thing to have an unending sentence, but to have committed no crime. Most people, even if they go to prison, they know when well, not everybody, but most people know when their sentence will end. So you have some hope for the future. And, to say to him, you will be allowed to do programs while you're in the prison and that will keep you occupied. And guess what those programs are? They are crochet and, those kind of things. You just think, this is crazy. This is one of the most intelligent men in the world who's used his intelligence and his technical genius and his journalistic skills to do something wonderful. And instead of using his skills at a time when the world is struggling, whether with climate crisis or with other kinds of health crises, we have him locked up in a prison to slowly, over 10 years, just break him down to the point where he cannot do anything. It's just awful. Are you guys still there, or am I talking to myself?
No. I think everyone agrees with you, like what you are saying. I do have one question, and that is, when do you expect an outcome to this? That the judge will give a ruling, or is that already known? Or
no, the judge. It was very interesting. At the end of the hearing, the judge said, "We will to the parties. We will communicate with you in the usual way in due course." So we don't know what that means. Whether it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something in that kind of time frame, I guess. But we don't know when.
see, and even that is already strange because, like, in the meantime, we have an innocent journalist who continues to be locked up. He is still locked up, and he has to wait, and he doesn't know the exact dates and whatever, and that doesn't make sense to me already either.
Yeah, and apparently he was denied the right to be present in court, in person. He didn't want to come in via the video link because he was in such a bad state, because his medication had apparently been altered just 2 days before the trial. So he was excused from attending online, and the judge had given that permission, but yet the Belmarsh prison authorities forced him to come into the room, so he had to listen to this awful man, I would say, from the prosecution, talking about all the things that are most private and, whatever, personal to you in such a demeaning way. And without having any right of reply or being able to say anything. It's awful for him. And luckily on the second day, it was arranged that he didn't have to be there. But I looked at him through through this video thing, and I was looking at his arm and thinking, that looks about a little bit thicker than the arm of my child who's 7. He's really lost weight, but his face is swollen. And they've not just ruined his mental health, they've absolutely destroyed his physical health.
Yeah, I hope listeners actually understand what is actually happening here in front of us, because this is happening publicly. We are aware of this information. There is a journalist literally being crucified in front of us. Like, just the only way I can explain it. Like, they're showing us what they can do to a journalist who did nothing criminal, who just exposed actual war crimes, murder of civilians in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all these things. That's what they can do to journalists, and they. Like, this is happening so in the open, and there should be far more action. I know there are a lot of protesters in the street. There's a lot of people speaking out for this, but actually, if you understand what's really going on, other journalists, people who value a free press in any way, you need to do something about this. Like, because this is like, if you sum up all the things they did to him already, like the smearing in the media, like they called him a rapist and everything, not allowing him to do his own defense. Like, he wanted to write something to defend himself. They sent him a laptop with the keys glued, right? Like, he couldn't even write anything on it. I remember that story about him not having winter clothes, the winter clothes only being available in like June. And you know, he's unable to get like exercise and locked up in a cell and everything. And what you're saying about him not being allowed to attend his own court case, yeah, I saw that Stella Morris said that on Twitter. Like, she rectified that because they actually said he denied it or something. I think is what they said, and Stella she rectified that. No, he wasn't allowed to attend his own court case. So
Yeah, he wasn't allowed to attend in person. So I think the idea was that he was allowed to attend virtually. But you know, when you attend virtually, I know you guys do lots of stuff online, right? But you need to have some kind of back channel to be able to talk to your lawyers and maybe ask a question or comment or say, oh, I don't agree with this. Can you stop them there? Whatever else. But he doesn't have that. Even in court, he doesn't have that. I mean, we were at the stage when he was still in court. He was having to get down on his knees to talk through a small gap in this plexiglass, through a small gap, to catch the attention of his lawyers who were sitting 2 rows in front. And between them and him, you have the US Secret Service kind of guys sitting in the middle. And in these grand courtrooms, right, there is only a small number of people allowed to attend, even though there's plenty of space. And every time there's some excuse. Last time it was COVID, this time God knows what. But the restrictions are so severe. This time, I mean, actually, to be fair, this time is slightly better. It was not terrible, but it was, which is a major improvement from where it was at the other courts. But this trial should be being broadcast, at least the earlier stages of the trial, where the many expert witnesses were giving testimony. And you had people like Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg, you know, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, all these people talking and giving explaining what their job involves. Like Nikki Hager, the New Zealand journalist, was talking about what investigative journalists do and whether Assange was doing what other journalists do. And none of this was made available to the public. And I strongly recommend that people have a go at the BBC and time.com, because you look at their explainers on Assange, and it's really important that people have a go and send some complaints into these people, because the explainer is just bizarre. I mean, the time.com one actually says Assange revealed what are supposed war crimes or alleged war crimes to some extent. And you just think, no, gunning down civilians who are injured is a war crime. There is no supposed or alleged about that. And it's very important that we say to the BBC and to Time magazine, which have huge followings amongst the mainstream, that this standard is not good enough. This is not acceptable. And we need to do that politely and in a way in which we get some change.
Yeah, and I mean, if anyone who listens missed the actual evidence of war crimes, you only have to search for this video called Collateral Murder, and you see soldiers shooting at civilians and 2 journalists from Reuters. they were fired upon and they would do nothing wrong. So you have the proof in your face if you would ever doubt that. So, and that's just the start of it. That's the tip of the iceberg. But WikiLeaks exposed with the load of documents and evidence that you will be shocked if you read through everything. So I have two questions for me. I know you have to go, Deepa. So one question is, what is our plan if he gets extradited? And by the way, you're muted. I'm not sure.
So I don't think he can be extradited right away. I think that what happens is if the appeal gets upheld, the judgment goes back to either the Secretary of State or to the lower magistrates court. So we hope that doesn't happen. I really thought the judges were listening to some of the very important arguments that the defense were making on day 2. And if he doesn't get extradited, we need to make sure that he's given, that we all demand restitution for him, and that he's freed and treated fairly, given he has been illegally confined for nearly 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But okay, and so that's the main question, and like there's one little question, and that is that what can we all do? And I think you all already gave some advice on that. We have to like scold the BBC and the Time a bit about this, right? I mean, but what can people do to get involved with this case and to support Assange and press freedom? And
so I want to highlight a book that's coming out. It's already out in, I think it was out in Swedish later this month, and it's already out in German. It's called Der Fall Assange in German, and in Swedish I can't remember the name, but it's about the case. It's by Niels Meltzer, who's the UN rapporteur on torture, and he explains the case really well. Maybe you could buy a friend or an influential media person a copy of the book for Christmas. Encourage them to read about the case, because there are a lot of people who think, I mean, I think there are lots of people who are bad actors, right? But there's also lots of people who are in that centrist middle ground who think, I don't know too much about the case. I remember there are people saying there's some sexual assault allegations. I don't want to get involved with this guy. I'm not going to think about him. So there's quite a big proportion of people who are in that space. The other things you can do, which some amazing things happening, there's going to be a 2-week film festival happening in a screening of Hacking Justice happening in France, in Paris, next month. So you can support that. You can attend the movie showing, organized by people like Victor Dedage and others. There's also in most cities. I know there's definitely in Berlin, in Hamburg, I think, also sometimes in Switzerland. I've definitely seen in Scotland, London. There are regular demos that are taking place, regular meetings, one on Saturdays outside Belmarsh. I believe there are other demonstrations during the week at places like Piccadilly Circus. You can, if you don't want to be visible, you want to campaign online, I suggest you understand a lot about the case, because this is one case which feels like 10 cases put together. And so most people don't understand it, and it's nice to have somebody who can counter some of the myths. If you have a small community group, encourage them to think about what it is, why it is that, no matter what they think about Assange, let's have the counterfactual. He's this nasty, horrible human being. He still shouldn't be punished for a crime he didn't commit. So we need to get that message out. If you have a bit of money, maybe you can send some to the crowdfund that Stella Morris has got, Julian's partner's got for his legal fees. If you don't have money, then you can do other things. There are people who are painters and artists who draw a portrait, or maybe proceeds from an event that they do, they donate. If you have a local community group, church group, your hacking group, organize something to talk about some of the aspects of the war on terror and what America has done, Britain and America have done all over the world, killing people. And then that helps people, even if you don't talk about Assange, you talk about all these things, it helps people to recognize that persecuting a somebody who revealed the truth about that, maybe there is something else to it. It's not about protecting state secrets. It's about preventing embarrassment of very powerful people. If you're a writer, please try and get an article in your local press or even in the national or international press about the case. You'll be surprised, even if you talk to 5 people who are around you, maybe one of those 5 people might, do something amazing for the cause. These things don't happen in isolation. It's almost like a ripple effect, and doing something in one place may help something somewhere else. So please do what you can, as even if it's as simple as putting a picture of Assange on your profile so that people know you support him. Or maybe writing a letter to him. He's in prison, he's alone. You might be a brilliant hacker or a brilliant computer person, and he might want to talk about something other than his horrible, desperate situation. Maybe you can ask him a question about something you're studying about at university and change his mind, make him feel happier. That whatever you can do would be great.
That's really powerful. Yeah. Okay, I want to add a small thing to that, because we're broadcasting on a channel called Revolution in the Streets too, and I know all of you guys are all attending all these protests around the world. Like every week, you guys are attending protests. I don't think it would hurt if you maybe just take a sign with you sometimes and just put "Free Assange" on it, or put a statement on it in defense for Assange and press freedom, because press freedom and the decline of press freedom and the attack on press freedom is one of the main reasons we are in trouble right now, that we are losing our human rights in different places around the world. So it never hurts if you ask a little bit of attention for this case, because it is at the core of the defense for press freedom. Okay, and just real quick, how can people find you, Deepa?
So I'm on Twitter at Deepa_Driver. I'm terrible at email, so I won't give you my email address. I have about 1 million backlogged. But if you message me on Twitter or you follow me, my DMs are open. You're welcome to get in touch, and also, through Mark. If people know how to contact you, Mark, I'm quite happy to take any questions or come back on the show or wherever to. If you have, one thing that you could do is, if you have a local group that you want somebody, you don't feel confident about talking about the case, but you want somebody else to come and talk about them, I'd be very happy to come, and so would many other people. If you're in Australia, there are people like Dr. Lissa Johnson, who's a psychiatrist who's done fantastic work on it. You might want to invite her. If people like Kristen Hafenson and who are at WikiLeaks might be people if you have a very big event that you want to invite. So there's lots of people, one of whom is in prison at the moment, so please send him your solidarity, Craig Murray. He's the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan who blew the whistle on torture, and is currently jailed for he's a political prisoner at the moment as well. He'll be out at the end of the month, but people like him might be good to champion and support as well. And Stephen Donziger, who's currently in prison in America. Stephen has nothing to do with the Assange case. It's just he's fighting for the rights of indigenous people in Ecuador against corporations like Chevron, which are polluting.
It might be a subject to ask you on for in the near future too. I mean, the Donziger case is also important. Well, thank you for being with us, Deepa. I mean, we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. Sorry I went on a bit. I think when I'm tired, sometimes I just... So
it's okay.
Thanks a lot for asking, and any other questions, just feel free to feed them back. It might be worth Mark putting out Neil Smeltz's interview at the Whistleblowing Festival. It's on EmergeHeart, so that might be something that I can put it in a direct DM to you if you want, and also the fantastic interview that he did last year on Republic, which was about a murderous system is being created. So that's a useful one if people haven't heard about the case before.
Was there a problem with people trying to get Niels Meltzer's book Amazon.
Sorry, I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this is actually happening or whether it's just my imagination, but well, it's not just my imagination. I've tried now to pre-order Niels's book 3 or 4 times through Amazon, and I went back because not that I'm patronizing Amazon or suggesting that people should buy from them. Please buy from your local bookshop. Please buy directly from Verso that is publishing the book. But I just wanted to alert people to the fact that in some parts of London, if you're trying to order Niels's book, it just doesn't allow you to pay for it. It just says this address is not accessible. And, it's not like London is in the Outer Hebrides where it's hard to get to or something like that. It's, living in the center of the city, it's impossible that Amazon doesn't have anybody who can deliver to this area. So I just had put out a tweet earlier today, which just to see how many other people were having this problem. I don't know whether there are any listeners who are in London. Maybe you can try and see if you can order the book. Not that you might want to cancel the order after you've placed it, of course, if you don't want to spend the money. But the book will only come out in February. But right now, there's on Verso, there's a 20% discount. Get the book. So, yeah. And I'm going to DM you, Mark, with the 2 links, one for Emerge Heart and one for the other interview. I think Niels is a powerful advocate for Julian. And yeah.
He's been advocating for Julian for a long time, and he's been really, really professional with that. And I would recommend reading the works of Niels Meltzer, definitely. Okay, I guess that was all. Yeah, just send me the links, and we'll publish that too.
Our listeners actually gave us the link away. The chat now.
Okay.
Do people have the Emerge Heart link from the Whistleblowing Festival earlier this year, Thor? Sorry, I don't know which one of you spoke, but there was an interview with Niels, which is about an hour. So for those people who want to just listen to a
You're cutting off a bit there. Well, okay, I'll make sure that all the listeners will get that. Don't worry about that.
me. Bye.
Have a good night, Deepa. Thanks for being with us.